In this video, I'm going to take you through a step-by-step process on how to turn this Raspberry Pi into a travel wireless router. Let's get into it. As things start to open up, I might start to do more things I did before, such as maybe go to the coffee shop more to do some work, take some road trips, travel more with the family. My name is Patrick, and this is Everyday Tech for everyday people. In this video, we're going to make a travel wireless router out of a Raspberry Pi. First of all, what's a Raspberry Pi? A Raspberry Pi is an affordable computer, a tiny computer, very powerful, that is usually used to learn how to program, how to code, but it can be used for many fun projects. In this video, we're going to make this a travel wireless router. So why have a travel wireless router? Well, one of the biggest benefits is, especially as we travel more, and especially as we bring more and more devices with us, so all the kids have iPads, all the adults have phones, and so when you get to a new Wi-Fi hotspot, you have to connect each one of those devices to the new network. But what if you set up with the travel wireless router ahead of time and have all the devices connect to that first, and once you get to a new place with a new Wi-Fi hotspot, or a new Wi-Fi network, all you have to do is connect that travel wireless router to that new Wi-Fi network. So it's a matter of convenience. Then all your traffic is coming from one device instead of many devices, so that could be potentially some added security there as well. Another benefit has to do with the features built into the software of the travel wireless router. One of those main features is automatically connecting to a VPN server, which means that you don't have to configure every individual device to connect to a VPN server. You can configure it on the travel wireless router itself. So that means when every device connects to it, that means they're already on the VPN server. Another benefit is ad blocking or content blocking. So you can block ads that are coming in. You can block inappropriate content for your kids. If you have those rules set up at home, you can bring them along with you. And another benefit is you can monitor the data, how much usage, the traffic that's coming through. So let's say you're connecting this to a Wi-Fi hotspot or a cellular hotspot. You can see how much data is coming through this router and kind of monitor the amount of data that you're using. Now, before we get into the step-by-step guide for this project, I'd like to address the fact that you can buy a dedicated wireless travel router. So this is the GL.iNet AR750, and I will do a dedicated video on this. But why use the Raspberry Pi as a travel wireless router? Well, maybe you already have a Raspberry Pi, so this is a good way to make use of it. And also, there's a lot of benefits as far as a web developer is concerned, and I'll get into that at the end of this video as well. But let's get into this step-by-step guide right now. Now, the main piece of software that we're going to install is called RaspAP. You can find it at RaspAP.com, RaspAP.com. It will run fine on a Raspberry Pi 4, 3, and even a Raspberry Pi Zero W, anything with a wireless network adapter. Now you can run this on older Raspberry Pis, but you'll need a wireless adapter that's compatible not only with the Raspberry Pi, but also with the RaspAP software. Now I've only been able to find one. I'll link that in the description below. But there is good documentation on the RaspAP website, but I did find there were little quirks here and there that caused things to break. I've actually gone through this demo probably about 5 or 6 times. So the step-by-step guide that we're about to get into is kind of the final results of what I found. Now, if you're familiar with installing Raspbian, the Raspberry Pi OS, onto a Raspberry Pi, then you can skip a little bit ahead in the time code. But I do recommend installing this on a clean install of the Raspberry Pi of Raspbian as well. So let's get into this step-by-step guide right now. To do a clean install of Raspbian or our Raspberry Pi OS, we're going to use a program called Raspberry Pi Imager 1.7.1. Now, I did a similar demo of this on my RetroPie video, but we're going to choose a different OS than we did there. So we're going to go ahead and choose our OS, go to Raspberry Pi OS Other, and we're going to choose Raspberry Pi OS Lite 32-bit. Now you want the 32-bit version. As of this recording, RaspAP doesn't work with the 64-bit yet. I believe they're working on that, but we're going to go ahead and choose the Raspberry Pi OS Lite 32-bit here, and then choose our storage. Make sure you choose the correct storage. because this will overwrite whatever you have on this. So I'll quickly go through this. I'll speed up the process here, and then we'll go through other configurations. Okay, so the latest version of Raspbian has been installed on our SD card, micro SD card, and you'll see that the micro SD card has been ejected. But we're going to want to go ahead and reinsert that back into our computer, and so we can do some other configurations. So the next step is we want to open up terminal or a command prompt, and this is going to be applicable for Mac users here, but one way to get there is you can go into the Finder, go into the menu, go to Go. Under there you can go Utilities, and this will bring up the Utilities folder, and then you can go scroll all the way down to Terminal and just open up the terminal from there. So now we have the terminal open, and the terminal can be intimidating for some people, but I'm going to take you step by step through on what you need to enter into the terminal to get everything set up here. But here we are. I'm assuming that you've installed or reinserted back your micro SD card into your computer, and it should show up as a drive now called boot, B-O-O-T. So we're going to just navigate to there. So we're going to go CD, volumes with the capital V, and you can hit tab to autocomplete. We're going to go to boot. Now we're going to type in touch SSH. Now this is going to create a file called SSH, and this will allow us to log in to our Raspberry Pi after we reinsert it back into our Raspberry Pi, after we reinsert the micro SD card back into the Raspberry Pi and boot it up. Now the next thing that we need to do is configure our Wi-Fi network. So that way when we turn on our Raspberry Pi, it's already connected to our home Wi-Fi network. So let's do that right now. At this point, we want to go into the RaspAP documentation, and I'll link to this particular article in the description below. But we're going to want to create a file called WPA supplicant. Now this file contains all the information for our home Wi-Fi network. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this file name here. We're going back into Terminal, and we're going to use a program called Nano. Now Nano is a text editor for Terminal, but you can use any text editor you want. I personally like to use Vim, but there's a lot of complications for that if you don't know how to use Vim. But let's use Nano. We're going to go ahead and paste our file name here, and now we're in Nano here. So let's go back to the documentation, and we want to go ahead and copy this information here. This will contain the details of our Wi-Fi network. Back in Terminal, let's go ahead and paste that information here. And now you can use your arrow keys and go to your country code and put in whatever is relevant for you. So I'm going to put US, go down to your SSID. This is the name of your Wi-Fi network. PSK is the Wi-Fi password. Now after you're done with that, you're going to do Control X to exit. Say yes. You're going to hit enter because it says it's writing to this particular file. So now we have all our information on our micro SD card. So now we want to eject our micro SD card and insert it back into our Raspberry Pi and go ahead and plug in our Raspberry Pi to boot it up. Before we do that, I'm going to hit CD to get out of that file or to get out of that folder. That way I'm able to eject it from my Mac here. So at this point, my Raspberry Pi, my micro SD card is in my Raspberry Pi, and my Raspberry Pi is booted up. It'll take a few minutes for it to fully boot up and also connect to your home Wi-Fi network. And at this point, you're going to want to find out the IP address of your Raspberry Pi. Now on a Mac, I can just type in the host name. And if you want to just type in the host name on Windows, you're going to need to install something called Bonjour. But here we're going to do SSH pi at, and this is where you're going to type in the IP address, or you're going to type in the host name, which by default is Raspberry Pi, and then you're going to go .local, and you're going to hit enter. We're going to go ahead and click yes, and the default password is Raspberry. So now we're logged into our Raspberry Pi, and now we can do some configurations here as well. Now before we do any setting up of things, let's go ahead and change our default password by typing in passwd, type in Raspberry for the current password, and then go ahead and type in your new password here. And now our default password has been changed, so this will be a more secure way to do things. Now we want to go ahead and do some updating to our Raspberry Pi to the OS itself. So you're going to go sudo apt update. So this will get all the latest updates, all the information and all the updates that are available. And then after this is done, we're going to go ahead and say do the updates to the Raspberry Pi. So now it's done updating that. So now we're going to go sudo apt. Let's do a full upgrade here. And this will take a little time. We're going to go ahead and click yes, type in yes. And this will do a full upgrade of our Raspberry Pi of all the different libraries that are installed. And after we do this, we can go on to the next step. So that took a few minutes to update, and it'll take longer depending on your internet connection and the version of Raspberry Pi that you have here. But the next thing you want to do is now go ahead and reboot the Raspberry Pi. And so we can go sudo reboot. And we'll wait for this to reboot and log back in. Now that our Raspberry Pi has booted up, we want to SSH back into there. So let's do that again. Pi at raspberrypi.local. We're going to type in the new password that we set. Now at this point, we want to update the country code for our wireless adapter here. Now we did that for our particular wireless network, for our home network, in the WPA supplicant file. But here we want to set it for the entire Raspberry Pi. Now, whether this step is needed or not, this is in their documentation. So we just want to make sure everything is working fine. So let's go sudo raspi-config. And this will take you to the configuration of the Raspberry Pi. We're going to go down to a localization option, go to WLAN country, and I'm going to go ahead and pick US here. Hit OK. And we're going to go to finish, where you can do that by going to the right arrow here. Finish, and go ahead and reboot our Raspberry Pi. Our Raspberry Pi has finished booting up, and so now we're going to SSH back into it. At this point, we're finally going to start installing our RaspAP software here. And so what we want to do is go to the main website of the RaspAP. It's RaspAP, raspap.com. And we're going to go to Quick Start. And these are some of the steps that we already just went through. But now we're going to copy this line right here. This will allow us to go through the installation process of RaspAP. I've copied that line, so we're going to go back to our Raspberry Pi here, our terminal, and we're going to go ahead and paste that in. And this will take us through different configurations here. So you're going to want to say yes to those. These two are definitely required. And now it'll start to install the RaspAP software. It detects on what OS you have and what hardware you have. So it'll go through different installations of the packages. So we'll go ahead and speed up this process. So that took a few minutes to get to this point, and now we're prompted with enabling HTTP only for session cookies. I would say anything that says recommended, I would say go ahead and say yes to. So the next two will want you to do some recommended things. RaspAP control service, I would say yes. And now these next couple things, you can configure different extra features in the RaspAP, but I would go ahead and say no to these. If you don't think you need it, or if you don't know if you need it, you probably don't, including OpenVPN and WireGuard. We can get into those in another video, where you can go ahead and click no to those. So now we're finished installing the RaspAP software, and now we can go into the configurations to complete our process here. So now we want to log into the RaspAP dashboard here, and we're going to do this through the web browser by typing in raspi.local like we did before, or you can type in the IP address of your Raspberry Pi. The default username and password is admin, secret. And now we're in our dashboard, and of course we want to change that default password, but we can do that later on. But you can do it by going to authentication and changing that default password there. But first thing we want to look at is, let's go down to wireless client, and you want to make sure that you are connected to your wireless network. So that's important before we start configuring our hotspot here. So just a little explanation what we're going to do. The hotspot is what your devices will connect to. The wireless client is what your Raspberry Pi is connecting to. So this is connecting to my home network, but we're going to allow devices to connect to our Raspberry Pi. So you're going to want to go into hotspot here. And this is the name by default of your Raspberry Pi's hotspot network. So this is the SSID that or the network name that your devices are going to connect to. So you're going to want to configure this with whatever name you want, and then go into security, and the default password is change me. So you're going to want to change that hotspot. That's the Wi-Fi password for this hotspot. But we're going to go into an important step here. We're going to go into advanced, and we're going to want to select Wi-Fi client AP mode. Now by default, when we connect to our Raspberry Pi hotspot, we connect to the Raspberry Pi directly, but not to the internet. Now once this is selected, the Wi-Fi client AP mode is selected, it not only allows us to connect to our Raspberry Pi, the Raspberry Pi hotspot, but it also allows to route the internet to our devices as well. So that's important. So one thing you'll notice that it's grayed out here. It doesn't allow us to select it. What you want to do is, after you configure all your Wi-Fi network here, security, basic security, I'm going to leave it by default for this demo. You're going to go ahead and click Save Settings. So this will put in all that information in there. And now we go back into Advanced, and now we're able to select our Wi-Fi AP mode here. We're going to go ahead and click Save Settings, and now everything is configured the way we need it to. Now we're going to go ahead and start up our hotspot here. And this should create our new hotspot network for our devices to connect to. Now you're going to notice that our hotspot is still inactive, and it did give me some errors here. So now we want to change our interface back to WLAN here. Hit Save Settings. Now what that did was we selected the interface that we wanted to share, and it created a new interface called UAP0, and that's what we want. And so once it saved the settings, actually it already started the hotspot again, and now we're ready to go. So the end result should be UAP0, which is the new interface that's not only sharing our hotspot, because it's really using one network interface on the Raspberry Pi. It's sharing the hotspot so all our devices can connect to, but it's also using that same interface to connect to the internet now. Now what we just did was we said use WLAN 0 as our main interface. So that's our network adapter, and it created this new interface called UAP0. Now there's all these other interfaces here. ETH0 is our Ethernet jack, but we're not using it in this case. WLAN 0 is our wireless network, but it created this new interface called UAP0. Now what that is doing is it's bridging the gap between our home network and our hotspot that we just created. So all our devices are connecting to this new hotspot on our Raspberry Pi, but at the same time, the Raspberry Pi is connected to our home network or a Wi-Fi network to get us internet. So it's kind of bridging the gap between the two. So now our devices can be not only connected to our Raspberry Pi, but also connected to the internet as well. Now, just to show you that this is working on another device, let's go to my iPad Pro here. I'm going to show you I'm already connected to the RaspBee Web GUI Wi-Fi network there. And let's go ahead and browse the internet here. Go to google.com. So I'm on the network here. And I can even go into the network here, or the RaspAP dashboard here. Let's type in our password. And now we're in the dashboard. Now let's say I go to a coffee shop. Of course, I'm not going to be always on my home network here. I can go to the Wi-Fi client here, and this will show you the different Wi-Fi networks that I can connect to. So right now it's only showing my home network, but if I hit rescan, it'll show other networks that are nearby as well. So this is kind of a cool way to kind of set up your Wi-Fi network, your Wi-Fi hotspot here, and connect to other networks no matter where you're at. This combination of a Raspberry Pi and iPad really opens up the door for me personally as a web developer. So not only can I run all the apps that I have on my iPad, but I have a full-on computer in the Raspberry Pi where I can install any kind of package, any kind of software on there. So I've already installed the RaspAP software on here, but let's go into my Blink app, which is an iOS terminal app, which I think is the best one for iOS, but this is a paid app as well, but it's well worth it for me. And I can connect to it like we have been in this demo, SSH into it using Raspberry Pi.local. And now I'm logged into my Raspberry Pi, and I've already installed a bunch of apps in here that I need. So recently I've been doing a lot more tutorials and learning more React.js. So I've installed Node.js and NPM on here. And so now it's starting this application here. And this is my point. I can install any type of application, any type of plugin, any type of package that I need to. And so now I can go to my web browser here, and let's browse to the Raspberry Pi using port 3000. And there is my React app there. But also I'm a web developer as well. I'm a PHP web developer, and I also develop in WordPress as well. So I can install a full-on Apache web server here and a MySQL database. So I can do a bunch of things on this iPad. So I am going to do a full-on video on how to do web development on an iPad. And the main accessory for my iPad in that video will be the Raspberry Pi. If you found this video helpful, leave a comment below. Now I will be doing a video on a dedicated travel wireless router device and to kind of give you the pros and cons on having a dedicated one as opposed to converting your Raspberry Pi into one. If you like this video, give it a like and consider subscribing. Until the next one, see ya.